Houston, we have a problem.
Find Professor London.
Either you're somebody, or you're nobody.
I'ma turn around with a great smile and walk my white ass back across 8 miles.
Trigger an alarm and I'll blow your head off.
Stop screwing with me!
Ooh, might make your head blow off.
Was it good for you?
I've had better.
Awesome.
Mission Control, we're looking at a red planet.
I mean, this stuff has been really wild.
If you decide to accept that, you're gonna seriously fly, son.
Don't forget to thank me, baby. Don't forget to thank your cookie.
What power? This power! Whose power? Our power!
You're in the middle of a war, one that's been going on forever.
What are you talking about?
You asked what would be worth killing for. Witness the biggest cover-up in human history.
You can't get involved in these people's problems.
I don't think they're gonna make it if they're not together.
To help arm our agents so that they have a fighting chance against the submachine guns of some of the most dangerous characters in the history of American criminality.
Stop saying that! You're not my son!
It's a bigger idea than just the concert. We all have the same struggles.
Ladies and gentlemen, here are the Beatles!
Thank you so much for believing in my weirdness.
Clear eyes, full hearts.
How big is the universe?
Infinite.
How do you know for sure?
I don't, I just believe.
It's the same with love, I guess.
Gentlemen, it's been a privilege flying with you.
I'm saying that when the president does it, that means it's not illegal.
Brian Grazer, the producer of every one of those movies and television shows, and author of this book. Thank you, Brian, for being back.
Oh, yeah,
Cool.
for sure. Yeah.
How do you pick the themes?
So any movie or television that I make basically lives inside of a manifesto that I sometimes violate, and which proves to be a big mistake. But basically, it begins with a thematic. Usually it's rooting for love, rooting for family, the success of family, or often it's championing self-worth, identity. And that all leads to a story. So once I have a thematic, then I try to find a story that will fit and be synergistic with that.
Give me some examples, like on Human Capacity or Finding Genius, where you pick a theme and then find a story.
Okay, well, the easiest would be, okay, in A Beautiful Mind, A Beautiful Mind began with, this was extremely personal, but my oldest son, who's 31 years old, 26 years ago, we realized he had Asperger's, a mild Asperger's. We didn't know that, but I would drop him off at school and I'd see kids hide his lunch and pick on him, just do pranks on him. And he was a victim of these pranks, which would be heartbreaking to any parent, of course. But just in the bigger picture of just humanity itself, I thought, well, maybe there'll be a point in my life or a time in my life that I can actually make a movie or television show that could help destigmatize mental disability. Just all, as mild as I said, Asperger's and as extreme as schizophrenia. So time goes on, I see my son, I look at people screaming into garbage cans, talking into garbage cans, stuff that if you're really observant, you notice it, and sometimes you're not observant, but you start to notice these things and you realize these aren't just crazy people. There are people that are living in an alternate reality often, or a disabled reality. So the movie A Beautiful Mind, I eventually, because I was doing these curiosity conversations and meeting Nobel laureates, I chased down John Nash and realized he was then writing.
Real quick, back up. Curiosity conversations. I know what they are. They don't.
Okay. So curiosity conversations were, they're conversations that I've done for 35 years. I do them with complete discipline. Every 2 weeks, I go meet somebody that's expert or renowned in anything other than entertainment, which is what I do. So it can be science, medicine, politics, religion, any and all art forms. And I target these people. I target Jonas Salk. It took 2.5 years to meet Jonas Salk. Edward Teller, it took 3 years. Carlos Castaneda, I mean, endless amount of people. And then sometimes I have to beg their assistant or the assistant of an assistant or a friend of a friend of a friend. And I end up getting to have a meeting that's a focused meeting with no agenda, just to talk and expand.
Some of them are in this book, right?
Yeah, a lot of them are in that
Mind,
book. Yes.
and including the whole list. Although I will say, we've just talked about Leonardo da Vinci in this room earlier. One of those things I love about his notebook pages is exactly like you have it as a list. Every week he made a list of people he wanted to talk to. Leonardo is like, talk to the person who arranges the locks and waterways in Milan to see how the gates open, or talk to Luca Pacioli about how you square a circle. And he would just make a list of the famous people he wanted to talk to. It's cool.
Wow,
just like
very
him.
similar.
So how do you get from something weird, like 8 Mile or something? Explain what that was.
Okay, so so there's a lot of movies that I think do qualify to be about genius, and there's certainly underdog stories where genius gets to see the light of day. And in the case of 8 Mile, I felt this movement going on, this hip-hop movement about 20 years ago. And it started where I heard someone named ODB, Old Dirty Bastard, from the Wu-Tang Clan on a local radio show in New York. And I thought to myself, what kind of a person actually chooses to be called Old Dirty Bastard? I thought, but he did. Yeah. So I decided I'm going to go meet ODB. I meet ODB. He's a really interesting character, hip-hop artist, the progenitor of modern rap. Maybe it was 25 years ago where he began. So 20 years ago when I met him, that led me to someone named Slick Rick, another rapper with a patch on his eye. I met to Chuck D from Public Enemy, and I thought to myself, this is a really, really interesting movement. It's a very powerful movement. I then was in New York, and I was meeting with one of the most esteemed editors of the New York Times. I don't want to say who, because, and this editor said, that's an inferior subculture. And I said, I don't think it's an inferior subculture. It's the culture. And he refused that. So I thought to myself, I'm going to try to view this as an equation itself and proof it out. So I then started building this story about hip hop, but I didn't have the exact story. I had the thematic. Then I see the relatively unknown Marshall Mathers, Eminem. And he's on the VMAs, and I look at him, and I go, that guy's really charismatic. So I go out and I reach out to meet Eminem. I meet Eminem. He comes into my office so I can do a curiosity conversation with him, and he won't speak it to me. He literally, for 45 minutes, looks away from me. So I cannot get even eye contact with him. He has an icy urban glare that is impenetrable. And then after 45 minutes, he goes, I'm out. I go, you can't be out. You didn't talk. And he says, he looked at me like, well, a little bit frightened. It was a little bit menacing. And I said, come on, man, you can animate. Which was a little challenging. And he looked at me again in a very sort of defiant way. But he came back and sat down as opposed to leaving. And he told me his entire story, which became the entire movie of 8 Mile, which was probably the most popular hip-hop movie ever. Maybe Straight Outta Compton now rivals it, but he ended up winning an Oscar for it, Eminem, which was the first rapper ever to win an Oscar. But he's a brilliant guy, and the story proved out to be a brilliant thing, but that's how that came about, by ODB the dot of ODB to another dot to another dot to eventually M&M, and then became that story.
You know, you just mentioned eye contact. I know you're particularly focused, so to speak, on the importance of that. Explain.
Well, I am. Well, thank you, Walter. So Walter has been a great friend, and we're going to talk about our series that we did together that's under the banner of Genius, which is about Albert Einstein. Eye contact, I just wrote a book on eye contact. So I wrote a book on curiosity. This lives in the same fertile space as curiosity, but it really focuses on eye contact itself, and it's called Eye Contact. And it's about the power of eye contact, the presence of eye contact. So it's stories that eye contact has been central to the decision to either do something or not do something. Now, in very tribal cultures, and I was mentioning to Steve and Gene Case that I had a house in Hawaii, which was really kind of a barbaric place on the North Shore of Oahu.
Yeah, Steve came from there.
Steve came.
Quite barbaric.
And his wife didn't. She's, by the way, I want to thank you very much, the chairman of National Geographic, putting our shows on the air. But in any event, you don't look at people in the eyes, ever. So it's the omission of eye contact. So it's literally you look at people in the face, but never in the eye. If you look at them in the eye, it makes it personal. And you don't want to make anything personal in that particular culture. So the book on eye contact is, I think you'll like it. They're interesting stories.
One of the things, you know, I've written about people considered geniuses, whether it's Ben Franklin, Steve Jobs, Einstein, whatever. And one of the things I learned and tried to do in the book, The Innovators, is that genius actually comes from collaboration. Mm-hmm. We make a mistake and we think there's some lone artist sitting somewhere and that person's a genius. It's when you collaborate across disciplines. You've had one of the most storied collaborations in entertainment history, you and Ron Howard. Explain that collaboration and how it works and came about.
Okay, thank you. So the way it came about was I was doing curiosity conversations that only involved show business 40 years ago. And because I really needed to learn about the business of show business and how you create leverage in an art form. And I was 25 years old and a television producer, and I looked out the window and I thought, I got to meet somebody today. I have a deadline. So I look out the window and I see Richie Cunningham. I see Ron Howard. Mm-hmm. And I think, I don't know him. I'm going to call him. But I open up the window of my third-story building and I yell out, I go, Ron Howard, because I'm that person that does that. I yell at him. And he looks at me like he's scared of me.
Yeah. Was your hair that way then?
It wasn't that way then, but it was distinctive unto itself. But it wasn't this exact way. So in any event, I yell out to him. He looks away from me like it didn't happen. I then call his office, speak directly to his assistant, Louisa. I say, I got to meet Ron Howard, blah, blah, blah. I end up meeting Ron Howard that week. He comes into my office, and he has this sort of aura about him, like aura of goodness, this glow, and that I didn't see in other people. And I was very attracted to that glow. I had no idea if he could direct anything. He didn't have the qualifications to direct anything, but he had this aura that I was attracted to. So he said, I want to be a big movie director, major movie director. And I said, well, incidentally, I want to be a major movie producer. So it was two guys that didn't have what they wanted to have. They were sort of theoretically hiring each other. But I had these two ideas for movies, one which I wrote called Splash, about a man that falls in love with a mermaid. And
we like that movie.
Thanks. And the other one was called Night Shift, an irreverent comedy about two guys that run a prostitution ring in the New York City morgue. So, of course, he chose that one.
He did?
He chose the prostitution ring. Well, because he wanted to get out of the image. He was all about getting out of the Happy Days Opie image. He'd now had a mustache to try to change his image, but that wasn't fully satisfying to him. So he thought, I'll do this R-rated movie with naked centerfolds and guys running a prostitution ring. You know, like, I don't want to do the mermaid. So he ends up doing he says, let me direct that movie. So I go out and I pitch that movie. Many studio executives said no to the movie Night Shift because they said, Opie Cunningham directing a movie? They turned him down. But eventually, we did get it made. And actually, the ball was up in the air and was tipped by George Lucas, which helped us get that movie made. Because I always believe that life is all about jump balls. So I ended up getting that movie made. Then I talked him into Splash, the romantic comedy about a normal guy falling in love with a mermaid. And that was the beginning of our relationship.
Tell me about why you did Apollo 13 and Jim Lovell, who we just saw get an award in New Orleans recently with David Rubenstein.
Well, look, because, again, I'm attracted to underdog stories. I'm very attracted. These are the things that live inside of an underdog story that matters to me. Human capacity and genius. Genius of a variety of types. So Jim Lovell sent to me a 12-page outline of what was going to be a book. And I knew nothing about space exploration, about aviation, the hardware of aviation, nothing to do with that. But I just saw this is really about human capacity. It's about 3 guys that are astronauts that are doing something that's noble, that's always important, that also it's patriotic, I care about that, and they've done their 100,000 hours of testing, of being experts, but an incident happens to them that is outside the purview of their expertise.
Houston, we have a problem.
Yeah, so they figure out how to put a square peg in a round hole. But ultimately, it's about these 3 guys that are really, really, really well prepared, but have to reach inside of themselves to find resources they never imagined could exist to survive. And that's what interested me, is this survival story. And then I later learned by creating an astronaut training school before we made the movie, we did that with Dave Scott and Jim Lovell that trained us all how to theoretically be astronauts. Science of that.
And then you take it further where you try different disciplines in a way, where you do Mars, right? I mean, I know that's a different thing, but that comes out of that. Why do you try a whole different medium?
Well, why I try a whole different medium? Okay, a couple of touch points on that. One was, actually, it was Elon Musk who I'd met in a curiosity conversation 5 years prior to that, where he was showing me he was test driving one of his first Teslas.
You're like a one-man ideas festival.
No, I'm not. But so he reached out to me and said, "Hey, there's a book on Mars. It's a world that I care about. Maybe take a look at it." So we did. So it was introduced to me through Elon Musk, and then I thought it was pretty profound. I didn't know much about it. I didn't know why he wanted to go to Mars. I didn't know any of those things, but I believe in him. I believe in space discovery. I believe in humanity. And I also think it's cinematic. Because you always have to ask yourself, if you're living in a cinematic universe, making movies and television, what does it look like? It comes down to as simple as that. So you have to make things look interesting, and Mars and space can be made to look very interesting. So that was a dynamic, rich universe, and that's why I did that.
Right. And what failures have you had, and what have you learned from them?
Well, I've had a lot of failures, all types of failures. The one I think you're might be referring to is that when I produced Apollo 13, I already had some successes that preceded that. And I was nominated for an Oscar on Splash, but success is not a straight-up trajectory. So even though it went like that, it sort of would go like this. All of a sudden we do Apollo 13, and everybody says, "You're going to win the Oscar, you're going to win the Oscar." And I became convinced we were going to win the Oscar. So we get invited to the Oscars. We got 9 Oscar nominations. A friend of mine, even Mike Milken, said, "I got to come see you 3 days before the actual event." Why? Because you're going to win. I go, "You can't say this to me." Anyway, the point is, I was convinced. I'd written my speech. I had my speech in my pocket. I'm now at the Oscars. Sidney Poitier is opening the envelope. Sidney Poitier is very mannered. So he's got the envelope in his hand. He opens it very, very, very slowly. I'm positive I'm going to win. Right next to me is Tom Hanks, Ron Howard, and Jim Lovell. They look at me like, you know, that look. So Sidney opens the envelope, and I feel like I see an imperceptible bee rolling off of his lip. So I immediately project that into, he's going to say Brian Grazer. I get up out of my chair to walk, literally, it's on film, to walk to accept the Oscar, and he goes, and the winner is Braveheart. So I back up to my seat. As I'm backing up, one of my friends who's chairman of one of the studios goes, loser, on his forehead. And so I'm going, I sit down. It's unbearable. And Jim Lovell reaches across Tom Hanks over Ron Howard and grabs my wrist like this and goes, I never made it to the moon either. No. So, okay. He so put it in perspective. So in any event, so that was embarrassing.
I get it.
All right.
As you mentioned, with Gene Case and National Geographic, and with me in a smaller role, you all produced Genius, which is the series that has just ended about Albert Einstein. First simple question, was it his hair and your hair that bonded you, or?
In some ways, no. No, not at all, no. No, I think it was it was mostly this. It was mostly that you wrote a book on Albert Einstein that I hadn't read. And it came up, Albert Einstein came up. And I thought, wow, Albert Einstein, I don't know anything about Albert Einstein other than these 2 or 3 very, very iconic images. And, you know, the idea of relativity, general relativity, and the idea of E equals mc squared, which I don't know how that's actualized in our actual society today. I read your book, and we go, holy shit, this is it. And we thought, we should make a movie about, a movie, well, originally we thought of it as a movie. We should do a big event limited series on Einstein because nobody really knows much about Albert Einstein other than the hair and a few things like that. And so we were able to make a very unpredictable, dynamic 10-part series starring Oscar-winning Jeffrey Rush that my partner Ron Howard directed, that you wrote, that was profound. It was amazing because it was enlightening. You gave us a sense of all the sort of twists and turns, and particularly the pressure he had as being a Jew and at that time in the world, and just the isolation of that and the humiliation, just all the different elements. And it all becomes encapsulated in your book, which I think we made cinematic in this 10-hour series.
But you talked about it being, thank you. The movie was written by a guy named Ken Giller, right?
Ken Giller runs the television.
And Noah Pink.
Noah Pink.
So I don't want them to be watching this live stream and think that I wrote this. They deserve the credit.
You wrote the book.
Yeah.
Noah Pink wrote the script, and Ken Giller runs the series.
But you just referred to it as if it were something we don't quite have a name for yet in media, which is a big event series, i.e. it wasn't quite a movie, it wasn't really a TV series. I think you helped invent that genre a bit at HBO, but tell us why that genre exists and what it is.
Okay, so event series have some popularity right now. They're made on HBO, sometimes on Showtime, now on National Geographic. Under the banner of Genius, we did Einstein. But basically, the progenitor of all this was they were made on HBO, and we, Ron Howard and Tom Hanks, and I made the very first event series that was birthed out of Apollo 13 and was called From Earth to the Moon, which was about the Apollo missions. And so basically, Chris Albrecht and Jeff Bucas said, we want to do a big, powerful, high quality, and spend a lot of money, 10-part series that will draw people in, that will have a gravitational energy and force, that will get eyeballs and have a long tail within our culture and society. And that was sort of the idea of it, and that became, I think it's part of what we know of why we know HBO as well as we do.
And so that was because of a technological innovation, i.e. the creation of HBO and their need to have events that made people buy it. We've hit another technological innovation, which I don't even know the name for, but I can call it Netflix and Amazon streaming and binge watching and everything else. How does that change how you do event series or whatever?
Wow, okay. Well, event series, it would be, okay, well, Netflix actually, they make event series and you can binge watch them, you can have them all.
And then under Gene's leadership, National Geographic decided, hey, we'll get into this business.
Yes. Just the dynamic, well,
the fact that people can binge watch, I guess, is what I'm asking.
Binge watching, I mean, I produced 24. 24 was one of the first binge watching experiences because you weren't able to binge watch it because it was released, 1 week after the next. But once you could buy those videos, it became a binge watching experience. But basically, binge watching can be done, or rather, event series can be done on live stream, like on Amazon, or it can be done.
Is it more fun than a movie, more challenging?
I think it's much more fun. Well, first of all, you have to have, it operates in a different dimension, actually, qualitatively. Event series don't have immediate ending. Movies have to have an ending, whereas event series have to have great, rich characters that can last over 10 hours. So in the case of Albert Einstein, because it was contemplated, by the way, to make it as a movie, but it's just not possible, really. It doesn't have an end, a conventional end, the way a movie would. But it has a lot of different sort of dramatic elements that have to have 10 hours. Mm-hmm. So basically this. When I started in movies, I grew up, the masters were Hal Ashby and Peter Bogdanovich and Billy Friedkin and some of these great, great movies that had really, really, really good characters. As movies and the marketing of movies started to cost a lot, like the marketing would cost so much money, they had to have really sexy hooks to get people out of their house and to see it so you could have big openings, because big openings generate the most amount of profits. So the sensibility that I grew up with these great movie characters, and I think some of the sensibility you guys grew up with these great movie characters, that has been transported to television and to event series. Whereas now movies are either Marvel movies, they're something that makes them really dynamic films that force people to spend, where they force $150 million opening weekend. So
are you doing one now?
Well, I did one, a Stephen King novel that's coming out. Then I did Da Vinci Code. That counts, which is what brings us back to Da Vinci, actually, as it should. But
actually, that was a very well.
I hope I explained that well. That the sensibility has switched, is switched in terms of what people will pay for and be profitable in films, and movies like a movie like A Beautiful Mind, a purpose-driven tour de force. Those films are harder to make now.
And you would do A Beautiful Mind now as an event series?
I would still try to do A Beautiful Mind as a theatrical
release movie.
But they would just pay less money to make it.
But it's somewhat...
but if they wouldn't make it, then I would do it. The beauty of it all is now, the beauty and the complication is that there's so many platforms and so much content available, and so how do you distinguish it? And so marketing actually does distinguish it. SVOD, because if you're subscriber, then you have availability to it right away. But I would argue that I produced this television series called Empire. And Empire was the #1 television show. It's now the #2 television show in America, and it's been for quite a long time. But the way it was presented to you, the framing of it, makes you, it becomes coveted. I'm making this very abstract, but I think in order to make a difference in the culture, and to create differentiation, people that make the content have to love the content. Therefore, they have to covet creation. If you covet creation as opposed to just the democratization of creation, which is also good, like YouTube is an amazing thing, and you can get 1 billion views, but then next week you go, what happened? Whereas if you market something and it becomes framed in a way that lives in our culture in a very powerful context, it will last for a very, very long time and becomes of library value.
Mm-hmm.
Okay,
One of the things that you've done is in this book and in your Curiosity Conversations and Curiosity, it seems you're driven simply by the curiosity, hopping around from different types of things that just strike your fancy. What is the role of curiosity in our lives and particularly in your art?
Well, for me, okay. Well, in our lives, and I say this to my kids who are sitting right there, I say, at the very minimum, curiosity is being generous to somebody. The very minimum, it's being present, looking at them, and being focused and present, and asking real questions that matter to them, matter to you and to them. Something will come out of that. At the very worst, you're just being polite.
Yeah.
The very best, you can expand a conversation because of curiosity into hows and whys and what ifs, because all my movies are built on what if. So you can expand a conversation, say with Jonas Salk, into something that becomes, almost biological, or, where you're looking at them, they're looking at you, and something's evolving out of that creates new and original ideas. Mm-hmm. And so that's usually the thing that gives life to some of the movies.
Give me an example of a movie you did driven by a particular curiosity you had.
Well, the first movie I made, Splash. Well, Splash was the first thing I ever worked on, really wrote. So basically what happened is I was a 25-year-old producer in Hollywood. So I was a kid that went to USC. No girls really liked me or cared about me. I was just a normal kid. And then all of a sudden, I'd produced a couple movies for TV, and I was on the set of my movie for TV called Zuma Beach. The hottest girl at USC happened to be on my set. Margie Bailey happened to be on my set. And I could not believe it. I'm now the producer, 25 years old. Margie Bailey's sitting over there talking to Suzanne Summers and Rosanna Arquette, and I go like this, Margie. She shushes me off like, shut up. I was going to say something, but she didn't realize I was a producer.
Yeah.
So then one of the girls, Rosanna Arquette, whispered something. She clearly said, that dude's the producer. You should know him. Margie, who would not even give me the time of day at USC, comes running over and goes, want to go out? So I immediately, kind of like Animal House, a bubble comes up going, should I have some integrity and say no? Or should I go out with her? I, of course, chose the latter. So I go out with Margie Bailey, and I realize this is what it's like in Hollywood. So then I think to myself, after the Margie Bailey date and a few other dates like that in Hollywood, wow, that's a little tiring. I don't think I want to do that anymore. So is it possible to actually find a great girl in Hollywood? I thought, no, I don't think it is possible. So then I thought, what would that girl be? And then I just kept peeling the onion and over and over again to like, what would it be? How would I define it? How would I make her then unattainable? Well, why would I make her unattainable? Then I came up with an answer for why. Then I thought, well, why don't I superimpose like a mythological creature on top of it to make her unattainable, make her a mermaid?
Yeah.
So So it was a series of what if, how can I, what goes on, and defining and redefining these sort of human traits. That's how that
I think you redefined curiosity too, but that's okay.
Okay. And then with, again, with a beautiful mind, like, once I bought the rights to the...
A complex book by Sylvia Nash, right?
Yes, a complex book by Sylvia Nasser, yes. But yeah, I won the rights to this book because I was really interested, as I was telling you. And then I ended up getting the rights, paid a lot of money, beat this other producer, my competitor, then reread the book and realized, wow, this is not very involving. And I thought, wow, why isn't it involving? And I thought, well, it's not very involving because it's kind of like an objective look at what schizophrenia is and how he fit into it. And I thought, how do I make it more involving? I thought, I don't know. And what does that mean? And how do I make the mind cinematic? Because you have to make the mind cinematic. You have to make it visual. So then I thought, well, when in 1985, this was one of those sort of having the faith that each one of these human beings I've met over time is a dot in a greater constellation of dots. One of those dots was a woman named Veronica de Negre that was tortured in Chile and survived the torture in Chile. And I met her in 85, and I was very focused when I was talking to her about, like, how did you survive, and da-da-da-da. And she said, well, while I was experiencing torture in real time, I created an alternate reality where I could live and escape. It's like creating a story in some other world that becomes real. And I said, okay, how does that work? And she explained the dynamics of how she could escape the real-time torture into this other narrative. So it occurred to me that schizophrenia also lives in multiple realities, in alternate realities. And I thought, why don't I begin this movie in one of his alternate realities as opposed to the way the book portrayed the book living in real time? So that's why the movie is a subjective experience, and subjective experience is what I think we want to have happen in cinematic form because it involves you, because it makes you part of the protagonist's journey. And so we got very lucky that by doing that, it projected each human being that was very involved in, like, is this real or not real? This seems real. Or is he paranoid? And then all of a sudden we have the epiphany, and we realize that that was an alternate reality. And this is his real reality, which is catastrophic. Mm-hmm. And that's sort of how all these dots come together.
After the event series, Genius, you announced, and National Geographic, okay, you're going to be doing this each year, on the concept of genius. And it becomes sort of a parlor game of who should be next.
Oh, yeah.
I know you were kicking around Picasso as something that there's sort of settled on. But what is the debate? How do you all decide? What are the aspects of genius you're looking for?
Well, that certainly intersects with your festival here in so many ways. But, okay, so we did, Einstein is inarguable. Mm-hmm. So that worked. Now, we're now at this sort of in real time in the crossroads of trying to figure out who should be our next 10 hours. And so we've thought of many, many, many different people. We've tried Hemingway. We thought of this person, that person, without going into all the different names.
Go into a few names. We'll have a vote. Hemingway?
Okay. You want to do it? Let's do a vote because he's very vested in this, by the way.
Yeah.
Because he has Da Vinci, and Da Vinci, once again, probably inarguable. But we're going to say why you think he's relevant today, and is relevant today really matter? Mm-hmm. Right now, we're
the answer is yes, he's relevant today.
How about Machiavelli?
Machiavelli was a very close friend of Leonardo's. They worked for Caesar Borgia together. Machiavelli is quite interesting because he's a very good writer and an observer. Now, one of the things that makes him interesting is he won't get in the arena. Steve and I were talking about this walking over. He wants to write about people in the arena and is attracted to very strong characters. And there's a scene, if you do Leonardo or if you do Machiavelli or whatever, of one summer in 1507, I think it is, in a tiny town of
think it is.
Imola. It was when Leonardo is spending one summer working for Caesar Borgia as part of a deal Florence made for Borgia not to kill them and capture them. They give him the services of two people from that town, Machiavelli and Leonardo. And they're trapped in this town of Imola. Leonardo invents modern mapping. He does a three-dimensional map of the town from a bird's eye view while they're all holed up in this castle in Imola. And I always thought, that would be a great movie scene. These three amazing characters, Caesar Borgia, Leonardo da Vinci, and Niccolo Machiavelli, all together, my summer in Imola. But I'm not a movie person. What do I know?
Well, clearly, Walter.
It's a scene in my book, though.
Okay, yeah, no, it would be very, very, very dynamic and visual for sure.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Right now we're challenging the idea. We're thinking about Picasso and trying to find drama and conflict and all the stuff that we did successfully in our series on Einstein, and you're still strongly lobbying for.
Or Ben Franklin.
Or Ben Franklin. Okay.
Edison. A woman.
No.
It'd be nice to do a woman.
Be nice to do. We have to do third years. It's got to be a woman.
Why not second year?
Who's the woman?
Ada Lovelace would be cool, but not probably famous enough. Rosalind Franklin, except for unfortunately she dies at the wrong time, right before they discover the structure. The Marie Curie, who was the only person to have won 2 Nobel Prizes in different fields of science, to have won it in chemistry and in physics. She madly in love with Paul Langevin, which caused huge problems because he was married, so she almost gets expelled. She's the only woman in the wonderful picture of the Solvay Conference, the greatest scientific conference ever. She and Einstein are sitting next to each other. It's all men, of course, besides her. And then Paul Langevin, her lover, gets killed by a streetcar or horse-drawn streetcar. So I would go for Marie Curie.
Okay.
And by the way, you get the radiation, the bomb, nuclear power.
Should we do Marie Curie as opposed to Da Vinci or Picasso?
Yeah, I would do a woman next, but I would do Marie Curie.
Wow. That was very Machiavellian.
Very hiking. It doesn't wonder. You can put Einstein back in because they take a very important hike together to talk about both of their divorces, but also to talk about if E equals mc squared, meaning that energy is comparable to mass times the speed of light squared, what would happen if you split an atom? And that leads to a lot.
It does.
Yeah. All right, well, let me open it up to questions or nominations from the audience.
You could do nominations.
No, if you're nominating somebody for the next series of Genius, present company has to be excluded. So, yes.
Oh, since you were plugging your oeuvre, I wrote a biography of Peggy Guggenheim. What's wrong with her? She went to bed with every man she ever met, and she was definitely at the center of abstract expressionism and the new art. Just thought I would throw that out.
Well,
and with that, I would ask you, how many
is
people...
obviously driven by...
Let's all read the book and find out.
No, but what I was really going to ask...
Peggy Guggenheim is great.
That's interesting.
You're right. It's wonderful.
No one's thought of that.
Now you have. Now the thing is, you must be inundated with scripts and
ideas
and whatever. How do you deal with that?
How do I curate that? Well, I like it. In fact, I even solicited it on my Instagram. I think I even tagged Walter and did the Genius thing, and I said, any ideas? And so I got maybe 1,000 different 1,000 submissions, and then we did a tally of what those submissions were, and they were pretty wide ranging. How do I deal with it?
How do you curate scripts that come in? I mean, you probably walk across campus, people are handing you scripts.
How do I do? Well, firstly, you can't accept scripts from people, so you can't get unsolicited material. The other is
Legal reasons, you
Well,
mean.
actually, yesterday as recent as yesterday, I took my kids shooting guns. We shot guns with a guide for 4 hours. And he was a great guide, so interesting and well-read and thoughtful. At the very end, as he dropped us off, he said, "I just want to ask if I had an idea for a movie, what should I do?"
Yeah.
So then I said, I was thinking about it. You're torn, but it's the essence of the person gives light to what you should do. And he was such a good guy that I just said, just give me the subject. And he gave me the subject. I said, I know that subject. I'll research it. If it's available, if it interests me and it's available, I will call you back and we'll do something together.
But you mainly talk about the legal liability if somebody said, I gave him that idea
Yes.
and he didn't give me half the proceeds.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
I mean, I've had all sorts of things. I was surfing in the ocean prior to the movie Backdraft about firemen, and some guy that was surfing with me goes, "You should do something about firemen." And then he later sued me on Backdraft. It had nothing to do with it. So, anyway.
All right, waving the hand frantically gets you attention, I guess.
Okay.
Well, I just wanted to go along with the Picasso idea because, like you said, the second thing, I think maybe you should do Another Man and get everybody hooked on the series. And Picasso is involved with so many women. If you show the humanity of the women, you're showing women who actually helped him go as far as he did. If he didn't have a woman to divide the faces of, I don't think he would have been as important. And I just wanted
Seems to be a theme of the
second your,
conversation
I
from
want to vote for
Mermaid to-
Picasso.
All right.
Yeah.
Further questions, thought? Yes.
Thank you.
Okay. Shout or we'll repeat and the microphone will find you. Sorry, there are lights in our eyes, so we're not good at spotting
I work
people.
with special needs, and Albert Einstein is the hero to many, many dyslexic children that I've worked with because he had a miswired brain, which these kids have as well.
I wouldn't call it miswired, but differently wired.
Differently wired. Is there any way that that can somehow be, it's too late to add another part of this 10 hours to that?
It's too late to add another 10 hours to that, but you know what? That's a very good point you bring up, in that whoever we do next, we should try to find a way to sort of filter that into it, because I think any and all geniuses, particularly the candidates that we're thinking about, I think that should be within the consciousness of the piece. I think that's a really, really good idea.
It's just terribly important. I've
Yeah,
worked
I think
with
it is
children
too.
on the spectrum.
Well, because we all learn so differently.
Yeah, to dyslexic children, and now they're like really very famous people with the right mentorship and help.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Good point.
I actually work on that some in the book. I try to do his, not just dyslexia, but there are quite a few syndromes you could do. The way back, then the way front. So they'll just keep our mic runners fully
I was going to suggest one of the great genius of Western literature and political thinking, Shakespeare.
I didn't actually mean to turn this totally into a pitch Brian and Gene on the next series, but it's a good question if I can broaden it a bit, which is, I think all great stories come either from Shakespeare or Mark Twain. Man goes on a journey, something happens. To what extent do you see Shakespeare as a genius, and to what extent have you drawn from Shakespeare?
I don't know how to, I wouldn't know how to address that, actually. But I want to ask you a different question. Sorry. What specific story, why do you feel that Da Vinci or Einstein qualify more than, say, Picasso?
Yeah.
And I think you told me about mastery of many disciplines.
I think
but I want you to.
I think that to be a genius, it requires, to me, some universality rather than just drilling down. Obviously, if you want a great genius, you can drill down. You know, there's Euler, who you'd never do, but he's like a great math genius, maybe the greatest ever. But people who can be curious across different disciplines tend to do two things.
To have evidence, like success evidence, or just like the motor or the mechanics, to be successful at something and have it be applicable to other things.
Right, they see patterns across nature and disciplines, and they have a creativity that comes from a curiosity that comes from hopping around on places. That's true even of Einstein, as you know, because it's in your series. He's stuck on general relativity. He can't quite figure out the mathematical formulas for how space and time curve. And he just keeps pulling out his violin and playing Mozart, because Mozart reconnects him to the harmony, and he hears the patterns of the music and the patterns of the universe. So to me, as I've said, it's not about intelligence, because intelligence can be narrow. And it's not just about a skill set, such as a great painter. It's about creativity and imagination. Those are your two fields, creativity and imagination. They come from being universal, is the word Leonardo da Vinci uses, uomo universal, the universal man. A universal man, or universal person, I should say, who tries to just grok and appreciate every single field. Why the leaves are flickering that way, why the sun causes a shadow that way, how you would convey it in art, and being a universal thinker, curious about everything, makes somebody so much more interesting, and to me, more creative. And that's why I did Leonardo da Vinci, is he is the person in history who most tried to know everything there was to know about every field that could be known. And that causes his genius. How's that for a long-winded answer?
That was good.
To your simple
That was very
question?
good. I think
Picasso
you're
does
in
a
there.
lot
You're
of good
back
brush
in.
strokes, though.
Thank you. So for you, Brian, for the next 10 years, where do you see your career going? And what are you most passionate about in your life?
Okay. Where do I see my, I love making movies and television that matter, meaning that they proof out with large, with people, with the mass. So I like to make movies and television that creates energetically something positive. It's kind of why even all of my movies and television have good endings. So I do like doing that. I'm very much on this, because I wrote a book on curiosity and now just recently on eye contact, I really care about messaging curiosity as a thought system. And that's sort of what the book does, but you can really extrapolate that out into something much larger and deeper. And it lives in all of our lives, that thought system. And whether it's just disruption as a thought system, but it gives life to originality. And originality gives me a sense of purpose. And I think it would give anybody it gives you a sense of purpose. Copying, I don't think, gives you a sense of purpose in the same way. Even poorly executed originality. I think that Andy Warhol is like a hero of mine, because you wouldn't say that his artisan skills or the things that made him great. You'd say it was other things, and I won't go into great detail about it, but actually, I'll give you a quick story about Andy Warhol, just super quickly. Sorry. Okay. I knew Andy Warhol because I was doing Curiosity Conversations. And what happened is, I then got to know Ron Howard early on in our career. We did Night Shift. And Andy Warhol said to me, maybe it was right before that, he said, "Wow, you're partners with that guy, Ron Howard." I go, "Yeah, I am." He goes, "He's an American icon." I said, "Yeah." He said, "I'd love to shave off that mustache." I said, "Well, I could ask him." He says, "Look, I'd love to do a before and after, and I will give him the original." I say to Ron Howard, I know Andy Warhol, he's going to do a before and after, shave off your mustache, he's going to give you the original. No way. Why? Well, this is part of me now. I go, okay. So then, he doesn't do it. Andy Warhol is Andy Warhol. A few years later, I produced this movie called Crybaby, a total flop. But I didn't know it'd be a flop. I thought it'd be Grease. It would star Johnny Depp as first movie. Ron and I, we'd always go to we'd grab a bottle of Great Bordeaux, get some In-N-Out burgers, and go to the theater. So we'd had great success doing that with Splash and a few other movies. Now we're going to Crybaby. We go to the theater. We'd eaten our burgers. We drank some wine. There's 6 people in a theater for 800 people. I go, oh, this is a wipeout. And he goes, oh, let's get out of here. We leave. We go back to my house. We watch a really depressing movie, Drugstore Cowboy, 1.5 times, drink more wine. He's really loopy. He gets in a car, goes to LAX. He gets there early for the red eye, goes in the bathroom, drunk, shaves his mustache off for free. Never got the Warhols.
Oh, no.
I don't know why I told the story.
Because it's a good story.
All right, okay.
Always tell good stories. You
Okay.
don't need an excuse.
All right, thank you.
Why don't we just give the microphone to that table, since everybody at that table raised their hand. You can share the mic.
So my question is about casting, because you've done some of the most wonderful casting. I mean, I get on an airplane, I start watching Saturday Night Lights. I go through
Friday Night Lights, yeah.
Friday Night Lights.
Yeah.
Sorry.
High school.
So sorry.
Saturday is college.
And I go through a box of Kleenex and I arrive in New York. And it's
That's sweet.
these wonderful actors that we never saw before, or surprising casting like it was a Ken Basinger in 8 Mile. Just, can you talk about casting and how you found these wonderful actors?
Okay. First of all, in movies, it crosses over, but in movies, you are trying to create a bigger-than-life experience. And in order to fulfill the bigger-than-life experience, you have to find actors that have so much charisma that they have a gravitational force that pull you in. How do you do that? You have to be really present, and you have to be feeling that. You have to be feeling, am I interested in what that guy has to say? If they're not talking. Like Russell Crowe, he's kind of tough to work with, but he's a brilliant actor. You're always interested in what he's thinking about because he's economic in the way he communicates, and he's got tremendous charisma, all intangibles. So basically, there are times, and I want to digress to this. On our series that we did, we had Jeffrey Rush, who's amazing, but we then had to pick a young Einstein. Yeah. We had done some screen tests on young Hollywood movie stars that said, yes, they want to play young Einstein. I cannot say his name, but we had a young movie star that was dying to play young Einstein. And the network was excited about it. Everybody, let's just pull the trigger on this kid. And then in the last minutes, like Ron and I go, should we pull the trigger? And then Ron goes, yeah, the network wants it. Everybody wants this guy. I go, but he just doesn't interest me. I go, let's look at this unknown kid. And we do. We look at this unknown kid, Johnny Flynn, who he was only known in that he was like a little bit of a rock star. He wasn't really an actor in Western Europe. But he had big lips and big eyes, and he pulls you in. It's the exact reason I hired Daryl Hannah for Splash. Amazing eyebrows. This part was so powerful. I was just you move in. That's how that's how we felt about Johnny Flynn, and we just hired this kid, Johnny Flynn.
And by the way, he was actually a musician in the band, right?
Yeah, he's a musician in a band. But picking the right person is so important. But you just have to have confidence that you have to spot authenticity. By the way, there's all these little things, like these goofy things that I will do that will ding somebody out. If an actor, or usually if somebody comes in too well dressed, I usually never hire them. Because they think they lack empathy. Empathy is about other things, not about how you dress, in my opinion. By the way, you could ding out my thoughts, but I always think, so if I could qualify for this, any cliche dings somebody out. Because if you only have a few minutes with an actor or a reading, and someone says something that's really trite or just a cliche, and they try to frame it as an original thought, even if that's not what they're there for, I think that's living inside of them. And so it just will disqualify them. So you have to create your own sort of signposts But like I did hire Johnny Depp in this first movie and he did become like a big movie star, and I just found him compelling. I thought he was really sexy.
Johnny Flynn will too.
Yeah, he will.
That was a
So,
smart
but casting
choice.
is unbelievably important. And those kids in Friday Night Lights were great and real, and we got very lucky. And Pete Berg, by the way, should be highly credited for that.
Brian, you're obviously a creative genius, and it's a pleasure to listen to you talk. At what point in your life did you realize you had a gift for telling stories, and did anyone or any person or event influence you?
Well, the most important person in my life was Grandma Sonia. Sonia Schwartz, who my book is dedicated to. Because I had dyslexia as a kid, my Grandma Sonia, this tiny little grandma about this tall, was always validating my questions. Like, there was never a question that was too dumb, too simple.
Here, wait. Read it. It's beautiful, actually.
Oh, I can't, actually, because I wear glasses. Do you want to read it? Will you read it?
I'm sorry.
Okay.
To Grandma Sonia, starting when I was a boy, you treated every question I asked as valuable.
So all you need is one. All I felt you need is one champion, one person that believed in you, and best if they are able to locate the specific skill you have and validate you for that skill, as opposed to just a general "you're a great kid" thing. So she was that person for me. And it just, again, it was just the sort of this tool of curiosity and asking questions that would give life to bigger stories. And it's not just the story in the general sense, it's the perspective. Like, what perspective is it told from? So you brought up Friday Night Lights. Friday Night Lights was about three things: high school football, small town living, which is Odessa, Texas, and about a boy's identity. Because I got cut from high school football, Coach Ogawa cut me in high school football in front of 300 kids. I remembered when I was somebody and then I was nobody. We were in a class, 300 kids, all the kids had done Hell Week. And every kid was supposed to say their status, their name and status. You know, Steve Jones, tailback. You know, Dave Matthews, linebacker, da-da-da. Brian Grazer, tailback. Ogawa, incorrect. He says, cut. So I was cut. It's not so bad. I was cut. It was gigantically humiliating. But before he got to my name, I was the kid that got through Hell Week. When he got to my name, I was, not that person. So I thought to myself, when I got this book, Friday Night Lights, I want to make a movie about how a boy's identity is formed, just how fragile a boy's identity is between 15 and 18 years old. That these things that seem imperceptible can be absolutely seismic in the shaping of a kid. And so the movie to me was about that. And it took 13 years to make this movie because I kept getting directors that only wanted to make a movie about football or football in Odessa, but didn't want to do that other thing. So a lot of it is just about the perspective, the entry point, the human entry point in which you see a subject, which differentiates all of us.
Brian Grazer, oh wait, I'm sorry, we did have one more at that table, and the two men grabbed the microphone first, so I'm gonna make sure you get the last question.
I handed it to him. He didn't grab it. No.
Okay.
It's so funny because I debated about saying this. I met you on an airplane in my 20s when I was considering being an actress, and you gave me the best advice I ever got, which I followed, which was never sleep with anybody in order to get a job.
Wow. We seem to have a theme here that I didn't want to get to, but that's all right.
Yeah.
But what I
I
really
definitely
wanted to
believe
ask,
in that.
Yeah, you could have been a mermaid.
Right,
yeah.
But what I really wanted to ask is about the construction of identity. And you clearly have constructed such a curious identity. And that's something that's missing in our political discourse and missing in our public square, missing in our own lives. And we're not doing a good job of teaching our children how to have curiosity for the people who think differently than they do. What advice do you have?
I don't know.
Make a great concluding,
Oh my God.
passionate plea
Thank
for
you.
curiosity.
Well, I can make a great, or just character. I mean, I think if you're interested in living outside of yourself and bridging into other people, either what they're emotionally experiencing, intellectually achieving, you're outside of yourself, you're going to gain something, and so will they. And as a function of that, I think it gives life to character. And ultimately, character is the thing that is the definer of all time, I think.
Brian Grazer, thank you for
Thanks.
being
Okay.
here.
Okay.
Appreciate it.